All right. My name is Luabikwe. You already know. Your AWS plug. I also, take classes on DevOps engineering. What we're looking at today is Linux, and Linux is one of the essential skill sets you must have to become a cloud engineer or DevOps engineer, or whether you want to use AWS. Linux is simple to use, however, it can be intimidating because a lot of people believe that you have to be some form of tech guru, a programmer, or have background in computer science to be able to use Linux. Linux is like every other operating system, the way you use your Windows, your Mac, your Android, and iOS. However, you just have to know the commands type. These commands are pretty simple to remember. All it just takes is for you to learn them, practice them, and for every use case, whatever commands that you've used a couple of times, you just say that it comes right from your heart as you use them. I'll see you in class today. Thanks. All right. So today what we'll be covering is introduction to Linux, basic commands, VIM Editor, filter, IO, redirection commands, users and groups, file permissions, Sudo, and software management. Now, before we go too far, let's see what Linux is. So Linux is a free open source operating system that powers most of the world's server, cloud platforms, supercomputers, and even Android phones. So, just like it's rightly said here, Linux is a tool that you can use to manage servers. And because you'll be learning Linux for the purpose of becoming a DevOps engineer or a cloud engineer, it's important that you understand Linux. So, as it's called, Linux manages the hardware resources, so you can use the commands to manage your CPU, your memory, your disk, run applications, security and user access, network systems and operation. So I won't be doing much of theory, so you can always make your little research to understand the history of Linux. So it was created in 1991 by Linus Torvalds, and it was inspired by Unix. Unix is an operating system that, for lack of better word, metamorphosed into Linux. I hope I'm correct. So today Linux runs AWS, Azure, and the rest. Web servers like Apache, Nginx, databases, containers, Docker, Kubernetes, and the rest. So when it comes to open source, Linux is open source. Windows no, Mac no. So open source are what we call open source is technologies or libraries or softwares that have contributors from all over the world. So people contribute to build into these solutions. So it's not one person that actually owns the software or solution in terms of contribution. So cost is free, whereas the rest are paid. In terms of server usage, Linux is very high, Windows is medium, Mac is low. You can fully customize them and command line power. So when we say Linux distribution, popularly called distro, so we have different packages that you use Linux for, and it could be around the Linux kernel. That's the after the hardware of your system, the next thing that interacts with the hardware is the kernel. We won't be doing a lot of theoretical explanation or hardware explanation. I just want to show you how to use Linux, and the reason why I'm just running you through this introduction is for you to have some point of reference in case you want to read about them further. So popular Linux distributions are Ubuntu. So this is like saying operating system, the different type of operating system. So Linux have different types of Linux, so that's what we refer to as distribution. Ubuntu is very popular with CentOS. I use those two a lot. Debian, Fedora, Kali Linux. If you see people who do cybersecurity penetration testing, so they use Kali Linux. So to put it simple, what this different distribution means is that there are packages that might come pre-installed with it that you are more comfortable with. So Kali Linux already has some configuration and settings that are used for cybersecurity or penetration testing and the rest. So that's what that means. So where Linux is used, so Linux is used for web servers and hosting, cloud computing, containers and DevOps, Android devices, embedded system. When you want to do things around Internet of Things, you use Linux a lot. So why do we have to learn Linux? So full control over servers. Most times I started my career as a web designer, and one of the things I quickly realized as I grew into backend development is I always had limitation in terms of some of the functionalities or features or functions I want to build for my clients. So you want to use a particular package, they'll tell you you don't have access to which contact your hosting company. So but with you getting to understand Linux very well, so you can just get your own servers, configure it the way you want, point your domains, you can partition and manage, your resources, and you see that you spend a lot lesser when you have full control over your servers, because you only work with resources that you want. You don't overload your services with packages that you don't need and the rest. So now, strong foundation for DevOps, backend development, cybersecurity, cloud engineering. These are things I've said over and over again. So the basic concept around Linux is, the kernel, the core of Linux itself. The shell is the interface for interacting with Linux. So this is like you have different layers around your server or operating system that runs the Linux. So after the hardware, we have the kernel, then the shell, then the terminal is where you type the commands that interact with the shell, that tells the kernel what to do. The file system, these are where and how the files are stored. Then exactly where each user manages their files and directory. You know how you log on to your Windows system or your Mac system, and you have to create another user for that same system, and somebody else comes in as guest, or it has to do Control Alt Delete, to log in with another user, and the user is taken to a different desktop, a different environment, where whatever he saves is stored there. This is what we call file system. So how Linux manages your file. Then we'll now look at user and permission, which is very essential, because you might have multiple people trying to use the same server. You want to create different users, give them certain rights and permissions. So these are all the things we want to look at here. So some very important directories in Linux, you get to understand them better. So you see what we call home directory. Home directory is more or less like, okay, I log into a system where I find myself, the location I'm currently in. And for a root user who is a super admin, you have /root as his directory. But for every other user, so if I create a user on my system, so for instance, I have some other user who wants to use my server called Ronke. So if I have Ronke login, Ronke would find herself in a directory called home/her name, Ronke. So if I have another user who have given access to the same server, and the person's username is Nola, for instance, and once Nola logs in, just like Ronke, Nola would find herself in a directory called home/Nola. So we'll be seeing all this as we progress. Now we have user executable. So when it comes to commands that Linux use to execute, that is used to execute Linux command, rather, you'll find them in the bin directory. So depending on the operating system you are running on, and most user installed commands are in user_dash/bin. They will have locally installed user programs at usr/local/bin. So these are executable commands that come with Linux, and there are some that, okay, when you have to install a package, and this package come with commands that can be executable. You would understand this more when we start looking at all these commands. So system executable, so system administrator command can be located as sbin. Then we have user sbin, pretty much like that. Now one thing you should remember when you're using Linux, everything is a file. Even the command you're using is a file. So the hard drive is a file, the external mount is a file, everything in Linux is a file. So for a command to run, there's a file that enables that command to run. So we're just mentioning that some of these system executables can be found here. For those who use Windows system and Mac, you just look at it like you install a software, and for this software to run, the software would set up its files in your C program files directory. So just look at it from that perspective. So we have configuration file. This directory, anything that has to do with configuration, will be found in etc directory. Now this etc is for engineers, DevOps, and this is a directory that they cannot do but go and do something there. So Libraries, so essential shared libraries are in lib or user bin and direct. Variable data files are in var. So variable data files are more or less like the kind of files that come with web servers. So if I install Apache, Nginx, and Tomcat, most likely the configuration, the log, the web files that would give people access to the server to be able to visit it from a web URL will be saved in these variable data files. So we have temporary files, essentially any file that might just be needed for a temporary purpose are stored here. Usually they get cleared by itself when you reboot. You know how you're working on your browser or you're working on a system and it's slow and somebody just says, clear your cache. So this is like the cache of the operating system, where things that might not be very important are usually stored. So we have dev directory, devices file representing hardware, we have proc directory, we have boot directory, we have opt, we have mount directory. So it's either you see it as mnt or media. So usually what happens is if your server, you have to plug in an external hard drive or a device on your server, right? Remember, we'll be connecting to a server that will most likely not have physical access to. As cloud engineers, you're probably just deploying on an AWS server or an Azure, so you most likely not at your beginner stage have any reason to come here. A lot of advanced users don't even get to pick up items in this directory. So just see yourself plugging in a hard drive, a hard drive or a USB stick on your system. Usually what happens is a drive appears on your Windows or Mac. So this is similar. So if I want to navigate to where my hard drive or my USB stick is, I have to change directory in this regard. So pretty much these are what we'll be seeing, a lot of them. So there are different Linux distro, like I mentioned earlier. Ubuntu is very popular, is beginner friendly, widely used on servers and cloud platforms, strong community support. So we'll be using Ubuntu operating system for our practice. So let's just jump straight at it. We have Debian, we have CentOS. You can read more on all this one: Fedora, Kali Linux, Arch Linux, OpenSUSE, Linux Mint, Amazon Linux. Amazon itself has its own operating system, so they have further modified a particular Linux distribution that suits their need for their customers. So they believe that all the necessary installation that is required for you to get started and jump straight at working with their app, with their servers, should already have been installed. So these are just the basic introduction part that I want you to get acquainted with. We'll be jumping straight to what do you call it, we'll be jumping straight to the next thing on the item, which is looking at basic Linux command. Now Linux commands, like I said earlier, are very easy to remember, simple to use, and but you need to have already have access to a Linux server. And for you to proceed to the next part of this class, you can install them. So in another video, I have where you can install a virtual machine, or use AWS to set up your Linux server. However, you can practice, just go online, search for any online Linux terminal playground, and there are pretty much a lot of example. I don't really have anyone I can recommend. Yeah, I know this Code Cloud have very good Linux interface, but I'm for Linux playground, that's what we call it. So I have one or two opened here, which you can always use to practice, where you can type some of the things I'll be teaching you right now, and you see the results, see how it works. And there is another interface down here that just works exactly as you want. So if you don't have a Linux server running and you just want to move ahead with the next step of this video to practice how to use Linux, these are other examples, these are other ways you can try it rather. Okay, so here we go. One of the things you need to first know when you are using Linux, I would suggest you have maybe like a notepad or where you can type these commands to remember them, because this is just fully practical. Once I log on to a Linux server, I can tell by this terminal that starts with the username and the private IP of the server. Now, most times what you see here is the username you use to log into the server, and also this could be the host name in most cases to the server. So this is just to give you heads up, right? Now, if I want to know which operating system is currently running on this server, if I wasn't sure, I would use a command to check that. However, from just logging in, I can tell that this is an Ubuntu server, because Ubuntu will give you a username called Ubuntu, right? And that's how you quickly know. But however, cat is a command in Linux that helps you display or print items to the screen. So we'll be touching that in detail later. But so if I want to know which operating system that is currently being used on my server, this is what I do. I do cat a / etc / os -release. So with this, I can tell that okay, this is a Linux server. This is an Ubuntu distribution of the Linux server. So every information, the version 24.04, and pretty much that's what you need to know now. Now the next thing is, the next command that you would use a lot in Linux is the clear command. Usually when you've typed a lot of commands, the screen can get very busy, you are confused, maybe some things are overlapping in your face, you just type the clear. So what clear does, it clears the screen. It doesn't delete anything, it only clears the screen for you to be able to proceed to type in other commands. So that's the next command. So I hope you've noted that. Now in Linux, there's a pretty much easy to use command that we do a lot. It's called pwd. Pwd means present working directory. Present working directory just tells you where you are currently working from. So if I type, so it tells me I am currently in the home Ubuntu. Remember when I was running you through the introduction of the Linux class, there's this part where I said that if you log in as a particular user and you log in, it takes you to your own directory, because the username in this case is Ubuntu, so it takes me to a directory called home/Ubuntu. If I were logged in as a different user, let's say Lou, I'll probably find myself in home Lou directory. Alright, so that's about the present working directory, and it's very straightforward to remember this command anytime that you're working with your Linux. So the next thing here we'll be looking at is how to make directory. So make directory is in Linux, like I mentioned, every item is a file. So how you interact with your file system. Okay, so my service just logged out. I'm trying to log in back to the server. Okay, so I'll clear my screen again. Now to create a directory, we use the command mkdir. Now what's a directory? A directory in Linux is a folder. So I did mkdir and I type a directory name called Linux practices. Now I have created a directory called Linux practices. So now if I want to change directories, I want to move into that directory. Now before then, a very popular command you must use is ls. ls helps you list directories. Alright, so list directory is how you display every item within your directory. So for instance, if I want to make another directory, so this is me making another folder or creating another folder. Make directory, I say kitchen. So by the time I click ls, I have two directories. I have kitchen and I have Linux practices. Now, in this case, I want to move into Linux practices, meaning that I want to open the folder Linux practices. I want to go into the folder Linux practices. So whichever one works well. So while I'm typing in Linux, one of the things you get so for you to move pretty quickly is as you're typing your commands, or if it's a directory that exists, I say cd. Cd in Linux means change directory. So I want to change from the current directory, which I am in the home directory. Remember, if I type pwd, which is present working directory, it tells me I'm inside home Ubuntu. Now if I do cd Linux while I'm typing, because I have a folder, a directory called Linux practices, as soon as I type LIN, I hit the tab on my keyboard. You know the tab key the tab key at the left, just above the shift. It completes what you probably want to type, especially when it has to do with directory or files that it's in your working directory. So I change to my working directory. Now you'll see my $sign, which is the pointer of my terminal, and you can see I have Linux directory, meaning that if I type pwd now, it tells me I am in home Ubuntu Linux directory. So at the moment I am in the directory of Linux practices. So you can practice that while we move on. Now I want to create more directories, but this time I'm creating those directories in the Linux practices directory. So I want to create mkdir. So I say vpdir. This is a directory. mkdir. I say testdir. This is another directory. I said mkdir, and I say DevOps dir. So I've just created 3 more directories in the Linux practices directory. So if I type ls, I'll find 3 directories in my Linux directory. So that is we creating directories. So if you look at it from a Windows structure, is more or less like I create a folder called Linux practices, then I open the folder. While I'm inside the Linux practices, I've created 3 more folders, which is vpdir, testdir, DevOps dir. So ls, like I said, helps you list directories. So let me go back one step. So now if I want to go up one level, that's I want to move out of the Linux directory one step behind, the way you click on back on your Explorer. So I do cd ... cd with a space ... So what this is, I go one step. Now if I do pwd, I'm back to my Ubuntu Linux directory. If I type ls here, I can see my kitchen and my Linux practices directory. If I go into my kitchen directory, which is an empty directory because we didn't do anything here, I'm in my kitchen directory now. If I type ls, I find nothing here. But if I do cd space ... I'm going back, I'm going up one step, meaning I'm going back one step, and I type ls again, I'll see my kitchen and my Linux directory. However, if I go into my Linux directory this time, Linux practices directory this time, and I type ls, I'll find my DevOps dir, test dir, and vp dir. So here I hope it's clear. So we're in our Linux practices directory and we're trying to create other items here. So let me click on clear. So clear is to clear the screen. It doesn't mean that I've done anything. So I type ls, I can find my directories there. I didn't delete anything. I only cleared the screen for me to be able to have a decent environment to continue my typing. So that's about creating directories, listing directories, changing directories, and going back one step in your directory system. Alright, so the next thing we'll be looking at now is to create some empty files. So I want to create empty files. Empty files are like, I just want to create a file, though I don't have content inside, and the command for that in Linux is touch. If I do touch file 1, touch file 1 is, I've created a file called file 1. So if I do ls, now you can see file 1. If you look carefully, you see that the directories are in blue color. Most of the time, this is what you'll have. and a file is in white color. So this just tells you that this is a folder, this is a file. These are directories, this is a file. So I created touch file 1. I can also do this touch file 2, file 3, file 4, file, yeah, let's stop at 4. So what this does is it creates 3 more files. So rather than type touch file 1, press enter, touch file 2, press enter, touch file 3, press enter, touch file 4, and press enter, I can just write touch file 1, file 2, file 3, file 4. So one thing you need to know about Linux is it's a, just like we said earlier, it's a command-based system. In order for you not to get confused, you have to avoid keeping space where you don't need to divide a command or create a replica of the command. So for instance, if I were to type a file intentionally, I want to create a file called my file, what will happen here is Linux will create 2 files. One is my, the other one is file. So you can put spacing in file name. If you must create a file like this, which is usually not the case in Linux, you have to put it in a quote. That way Linux can tell that these 2 items are together. But this is not what we want to do. It's not a good practice, especially when it has to do with creating and working with programmers and developers. They'll definitely not have files this way. In Linux is case sensitive. If I create a file called file 1 and I create another file like this file 1, there are 2 different files. So one is with capital letter, the other one is small letter. You know, in Windows you probably can't create irrespective of the case, you can't create 2 files with the file name, with the same file name. So if I type ls now, you can see all the files, file 1, another file 1, and what have you. So these are not necessary, but so we can move forward. If I were to delete those files that I don't need, which is what I want to do, the next command you need to learn is called rm, is remove. So like I said, Linux is easy to remember. Once you use the commands once or twice, you probably won't forget. So rm is to say I want to remove file 1. Linux does not have undo when it comes to delete, so you need to be very sure what you're doing. And you can see it's not asking me are you sure, and that's because you had to type it and you hardly make mistakes in cases like this. So I believe that that makes sense. So if I type ls, those unwanted files are gone. So rm command in Linux is to remove files. Alright, so the next thing we want to look at is to understand path in Linux. So when I say path, it means how to locate a file from either a relative location or an absolute location. So there are 2 types of paths in Linux. I'm sure you get them and you use them a lot as you progress in your Linux learning. So if I were to change directory to testdir, for instance, testdir is a directory. This is testdir here. I'll do cd testdir. I'm in my testdir, so you see it shows me Linux testdir. While I'm in testdir, I can't change directory to vpdir. I can't do cd vpdir. This won't work. Why? Because there's no vpdir in testdir. Now if I were to change directory to vpdir, knowing fully well that vpdir is just back 1 level, I'll do cd with a /. So the dot is go back 1 step, then I'll go to vpdir. This way I can move into vpdir from testdir. These are relative paths, right? You can do that multiple steps. So let's say I want to go straight into my remember I had a directory called kitchen that's in my home directory. I'll do things like dash hyphen, then I'll do kitchen this way. Kitchen this way. I've moved straight into the kitchen dir. Now these are you moving relatively from the location where you are. But if I'm very certain, I know the direct path of my VPDIR. I know my VPDIR is inside Linux practices, and Linux practices is inside my home. Remember, PWD. This is my current directory. I'm inside home Ubuntu. However, I want to go to my Linux practices and my VPDIR. So here I'll do cd/home. So you start with the first slash. The first slash means that you've gone back to the root directory. That's the beginning of the Linux kernel. To say, okay, from the very basis of the root, I'm going into my home, I'm going into Ubuntu, I'm going into Linux dir, and I'm going from there into DevOps dir. This is me typing the full path. So sorry, it's DevOps dir. I'm typing a full path. So this is an absolute path. If I know the absolute path to where I'm going to, this might be for the purpose of just changing directory. In some cases, it might be that I'm creating an application and I want to create a link to a configuration file. I want this configuration file to be accessible from the root, from an absolute path perspective. So you have to type an absolute path straight up. Now, if I go to cd/, I've gone to the root of the Linux server. If I type ls here, there are so many folders that come with the roots. Now, this is not where you want to work in as a regular user. Most of all the access and you might not even have the right permission to walk around this directory, but this is the beginning of everything. Now, inside here you find home. If I go cd home and I type ls here, this is where it shows me all the different users that have access to this server. So at the moment we only have one user called Ubuntu. We have two users, right? The root user and Ubuntu. The root user doesn't show as a folder that you can access from wherever you are. So these are some of the things you might need to understand. So if I were to go straight into the VARDIR, if I do cd var from here, there's no directory called var, so I have to do /home, put the / first. So I've gone back to the root and I type var. So this way I can get into the var directory that has other directories in them. So now another very important command in Linux, which I use a lot, it comes really handy, especially when you moved around the different directories in the Linux server, and you might be confused maybe as a beginner, but you just want to go straight to your home directory, meaning that you want to go back to your own desktop, you want to go back to your own directory, your own home directory. You type cd, there's a curly braces, a curly hyphen, this curly hyphen, then you put a slash. What this does is, irrespective of where you are, which directory you find yourself on the Linux server, it takes you straight up to your home directory. Now, these are very important commands in Linux that you must learn. So now we've seen how to create directories, learn how to manage directories, learn how to further manage further move around the Linux services. So let's type ls here. We have this. So I go into my Linux practices. While I'm in my Linux practices, let's say I want to create a directory using a relative path. So I can create a directory straight up in my DevOps dir, right? And for me to do that, I type mkdir and I type DevOps dir / so let's say I'm creating a directory called Ansible. So mkdir DevOps dir. So if DevOps dir doesn't exist, you might get a lashback or an error saying that that directory doesn't exist. So let's say I want to create Ansible in a directory called DevOps dir. It will tell you cannot create a directory with this path because no such file or folder or directory exists. So if I go into my cd DevOps dir and I type Ansible, I'll find the Ansible directory there, meaning that there's a directory called Ansible in DevOps. So that's you creating a directory using the relative paths. So let me clear my screen again. Now I type ls, I have these directories here. However, I can also create a directory using an absolute path, right? So the absolute path for the DevOps directory, so I want to create another directory in the DevOps directory called AWS. So we have cd home Ubuntu Linux practices DevOps dir and I'll say AWS. So I'm not changing directory, sorry, I want to make directory, so I want to say mkdir. So this just creates a directory called AWS inside this directory. It's a bit tricky, but if you practice it, you'd understand clearly the difference between creating a directory using the relative path or an absolute path. To keep it simple, go to the directory where you want to create the directory and create it there. So I can just navigate straight into this directory by saying I want to go straight into DevOps practices. I type ls, I have two directories there, Ansible and AWS, and I make whatever directory I want to make there. So let's say I want to make a directory called phone. So if I type ls, I have Ansible, AWS, phone. So these are very important things you need to practice because that helps you understand clearly how to move around the Linux environment. So that's what I've been showing you. You do cd ... it takes you one step. You've left the DevOps directory, you're now in the Linux directory. Type cd ... again. I'm in my home directory. If I type pwd, I'm in home Ubuntu. The user I'm currently logged in is Ubuntu. That's why you're seeing the home Ubuntu directory. So I hope I've been able to put some simple things in perspective for you. Now, back into our Linux directory. So I want to change into the Linux directory and type ls. We want to move into a new set of commands. So now the next command I want to show you is copy. And I want to be able to copy a file from one directory to another directory. The copy in Linux is cp. So cp is the command to copy. So if I do cp file 1, so I want to copy file 1. Where do I want to copy it to? I want to copy it into the tests dir. So I'm copying cp, not cd. So you type cp, then you type the target file and the destination. So I do cp file 1 to test directory. If I hit enter now, by the time I type ls and I move into my test directory and I type ls, I'll find file 1. So I've successfully copied file 1 into the tests directory. Right, so let me do cd ... again. So I'm back to my Linux practices directory. So this is for you to see that files can be copied from one directory to another. Let me type ls. Another way to copy, now you know I copied a file into test directory. That works. But I can't copy a directory into a directory like that. So if I do cp tests, so because this is a directory and I want to copy it into another directory, so I want to copy test directory into vp directory, I'll get an error. Why? Because it expects me to add an option called -r. That is you saying that you want to copy recursive. Recursive here means copy the directory and everything in it. So you can't copy a directory without this additional command. So if I do this now and I do cd vp dir, here I can see that I've moved into the vp dir, and when I type ls inside the vp dir, and I have test dir again because I made a copy of test dir in the vp dir. Then if I do ls tests dir. So you can do this as well. When you type ls with a name, with a directory name, it means I want to see everything in that directory. So I don't need to cd into test dir to see the items in test dir. So I'm still in my VP dir, but I just try to see the content of the test dir. So this also makes it handy for you to be able to copy. So the command for copying a file or a directory from one location to another is cp command. Sorry, let me clear my screen again. So I do cp the file I want to copy and where I want to copy it to. If I want to copy a directory which would have a file in it, so I'll do cp-r. I type the file name and the location I want the file to go to. So this is how you do copy. So this is also applicable. Let me do cd dot dot. So with cd dot dot, I can say I see the directories that are here. Now we have copy and we have move. Copy is to create a replica of the file. So copy does not delete the file from the source. However, we have move. Move is similar to cut and paste on Windows, right? So in this case, I want to move DevOps dir into VP dir. So the command for that is mv. So I'll do DevOps dir. I'll do DevOps dir, and I'm moving it into VP dir. If I type ls here again, we would not find DevOps dir in this list. So if I do cd VP dir and I type ls, I'll find DevOps dir there. I'll have test dir there. So now I would also go back one step. I type ls. Now I want to move file 1 and file 2 into DevOps. I want to move file 1 and file 2 into VP dir, and we'll do the same again with file 3 and file 4, right? So I do so I want to move file 3 and file 4 into VP dir. So I do mv file 3. So you can type multiple files, file 4, then the last file will be where you want to move them to. So we want to move them into VP dir. If I type ls, I won't find file 2 and file 3 and file 4 here any longer. But when I go into VP dir and I type ls here, I'll see the DevOps dir, the file 3 and file 4, and I will also see the test dir. So this is we moving files from one location to another. Now this is we've also seen how to remove a file. So while we're here, I can remove file 1. If I type ls, we'll no longer have file 1 here. We'll just have file 2, test dir, and VP dir. So I want to also show you how to delete a directory. So deleting a directory is similar to you trying to copy a directory. It won't just work. So I want to delete test dir. So I type rm test dir. It'll tell you cannot remove test dir because it's a directory. So for me to remove that, I'll do rm/rf. The recursive is to say delete this directory and everything in it. Then the f is more or less an option for force. So it's like a force delete. Then I type test dir. That way, if I type ls, we no longer have test dir. We only have file 2 and VP dir. Let me clear my screen. I type ls again. So we only have file 2 and VP dir. So these are pretty much basic Linux command that you should know when it comes to managing a Linux service. We'll continue with the next thing on our table of contents, which right here is we've looked at introduction to Linux, we've looked at this. So the next thing is to jump on to the third one, which is VIM Editor. So we're looking at VIM Editor next. So so far so good. I believe you've learned a couple of stuff. I would like you to put this into practice them very well before we move to the next class. Thank you. So let me just clear this. All right, now we want to look at VIM Editor. VIM Editor is more or less like a tool you use to manage configuration files, edit files, manipulate files. Because as a DevOps engineer, you need a lot of file editing. So the first thing you need to do is to install. So in Ubuntu Linux, you do sudo apt-get install vim, because you might want to try the vim command and it won't work. So with this, you can just install. For my system, it already has vim installed. If you don't have it, the command above would install vim. Now let me clear my screen. Clear. So while we're in our Linux practices directory, I want to create a file called my first file. So you use vim first file.txt. So I'm creating a file, and unlike touch that just creates the file, vim will create the file and lets you go right into it and start editing it. So in vim, you would have to type a bit of file. So immediately I just need to type some few items. I'll hit the I, just type I on your keyboard to switch to insert mode. I'll be explaining that much later. So this is first line in VIM Editor. This is a second line. Other items follow from here, and much more. So using VIM Editor requires that you switch between three modes. Now the first mode is the insert mode. This is the mode we're typing with. The second mode is the command mode. So I'll hit escape. Now if you look at the bottom part, you see insert. It tells you we're in insert mode. Insert mode only means that you can type at will. So if I hit escape, the mode changes, it disappears. So I'll have to use colon. Colon is, you hold your shift on your keyboard, this is the column I mean, then type WQ. WQ means save and quit. This is write and quit. These are command you need to understand as we move on. I have a sheet that explain all the commands that I use in the entire course, especially the ones that cover VIM Editor. So now I have saved that file called first file.txt. If I type ls, I'll see the file. I have file 2, I have vpdir, and I have first file.txt. Now to view the content of the file, remember in the beginning I used the command called cat at some point. So I'll say cat first file.txt and I hit enter. What this does, it shows me the content of that file. I'm not in the file, I only viewed the content of the file. So if I have to view the content of a lot of text in a file, I just hit type cat to go into the file. Now we have two types of editors in Linux. There's VI, so you can type VI. So I can do VI first file. That comes by default with any like Linux distribution, but Vim has more features, so that's why we'll stick to Vim. Vim is an improved version of VI. VI is just a visual display editor. Now, like I said, we have three mode in Vim that you can use to edit files in Linux. So one of them is the command mode, the other one is the insert mode, and the third one is the extended command mode. We'll be looking at those three in a bit. So for the command mode is where you type your command. So if I go back to that file, I type vim file, so meaning I want to edit the file, I want to continue editing the file. So vim, at the moment I'm in my command mode. My command mode tells me to try out some things. So trying out some things require me on my keyboard, if I type GG, so that's in lowercase, if I hit G twice, it takes me to the beginning of the document. You can see my cursor moved to the beginning of the document. However, if I hold Shift G, it brings me to the end of the document. Look at what has happened here. So GG takes me to the beginning of the document. Shift G brings me to the bottom of the document. So if I go back to the beginning of the document, so I'm in my command mode. The keys on the keyboard mean different things at this point. So the popular ones is going to the beginning of the document, going to the end of the document. If I type W, so hitting the W key on my keyboard, W just takes me forward the next word, right? And if I hit B, it takes me backward word by word. Now these are commands that there are a lot of commands like that. I would share documents. The path to the document is here, so everything you need to know about the VIM editor will be captured in this document as well. So all these commands that I've just typed, you'd find them there. So the next one you might want to do is to understand that you hit the I. Once I press I on my keyboard, I switch to insert mode. So if I hit I now, you can see the bottom of the screen has changed to insert mode, meaning that I can now type on this document as I will. So I can type more item. This is me continuing this document. So this is just me trying to pretty much enhance the document as possible. Now if I hit the escape key helps you switch back to command mode. So if I hit escape, this insert will disappear here. So I hit escape. Now I can press U on my keyboard. This will undo the last thing I have done, just the same way you have undo on your every other application that you use. If I hold my Control R, Shift R, it will redo what I have undo. Now these are, so I'll share a sheet that gives you more of this command, but the popular things that I use Vim for is things like I want to delete this entire line. So if I hit DD has deleted that exact line where my cursor is. Now I can use YY helps you copy a line. YY, so YY means yank. So I move my cursor and I press P. So YY is copy, P is paste. So I hit YY on my keyboard, then I hit P. It just pastes the content right next to where I have copied the exact item. So let's say I want to copy the whole of this 1 2 3 4 5 6 lines. I go to the beginning, I hit figure 6 on my keyboard, and I type YY, meaning that I want the next 6 line, and I move my cursor to where I want and I type P, and the entire 6 item appear. This comes in very handy, especially when you want to copy certain things from a certain point and you want to paste them somewhere. Another very useful example is the same way I've done YY. P is to copy and paste. I can do the same thing with DD. So DD is a line, so if I type DD, I delete that line. However, if I want to delete the next 3 lines, I'll hit 3 on my keyboard and I do DD. So the next 3 lines gets deleted. So you can play around these few commands that I've shared: the GG, capital G, W moving word for word, B, and this is you moving around, manipulating your document with what you call it, with the Vim command. Sorry for that. So now let me add more items. So I just say 10 YY and I come down here and I do P. So it just helps me replicate the entire document. So for instance, if I'm in a very huge document, for example, let me go online and copy some text. Let me just copy some of this text here. I just want to copy some random text, pretty much. Let's say I have a document that has this text in them, so I'm just pasting this here. This might not be applicable everywhere, but copy and paste works as well. While I'm in my command mode, so if I'm searching for a particular word, let's say I'm searching for the word command, I put a forward slash here. I just type forward slash. So this is you using the extended mode, and I type the word I'm looking for. So command. It just highlights where the command is, and I'm able to see the word. And if I'm searching for the next command, I just hit enter, then I press N on my keyboard. That's next. It takes me to the next command keyword you can find. So if I were to search for another word called user, I hit the forward slash again, and I type user. Now on my keyboard it shows me every user. I hit the N, letter N, which is next. It shows me the next user, so that we only have one at the moment. So let me say use. I hit enter and I press N. It takes me to the next user. So this you can use to quickly search for a particular word within the document, and you quickly get there to do what you have to do. So these are some very important basic commands you must understand in manipulating VIM document. So let me give you a practical example. So there's a popular file on my system. I don't want you to go and edit this at your end. It's located in, so I can do Vim, then I go straight to the path of the document I'm looking for, etc. I have this around http, and I have a file called no, sorry, let me just switch to that directory. It's sshd. Okay, the file I'm looking for is in etc ssh etc ssh ls. So yeah, so I want to sudo vim sshd underscore config. I come here a lot, so there's a particular path I'm looking for, which I might be searching for at a particular time. To say I'm looking for where the word password is, because I want to make some changes. So I hit enter, then I press N. I keep looking. So yes, so this is what I'm looking for. Let's say I want to uncomment this. I'm in my command mode, so I'll hit I, so that I can further edit the document. This is me trying to make a change to a configuration file that I need to work with, right? So usually we search for the file, open the file, search for a particular part of the file or a line in the file, and get what we want. So I would do save. So now in this time, usually when we want to save and quit, we do WQ, but because I don't want to save these changes, I'll do Q with exclamation. That is save without, quit without saving. So usually that comes in a lot handy. Let me go back to my home directory. So I go into my Linux practices. This is where we have our file. So I can vim first file and back into our own file, which is where we want to practice. So other commands you can quickly understand with Linux is to see how to further try out some small what do we call it, extended commands. So extended commands are when you escape and you type your column. There are commands you can type here, things like W is to save. So I've saved the file, but I didn't have to quit. Remember, if we did column WQ, that means we want to save and quit. So I'm going back to the file. So you can do escape W, save without quitting. You can save and quit. I've already shown you how to quit without saving. And there are other interesting things, like if I do the escape and I do the column, I do SENU. What this helps me do is to show line number. You might be running a command in Linux, maybe you're installing a configuration file, or you want to make changes to certain file, and maybe your you get an error. This is you doing some advanced DevOps stuff or cloud engineering, or you're running an installation. You need to make changes to configuration file, and the system is telling you that there's an error on line 25. Before now we weren't seeing these errors, right? So to remove them is to say SENONU, right? This removes the error, but to display them is to say SENU. So we want to see number. We don't want to see number anymore. So this helps you identify the line number that is being referenced. You can easily go to the line because there are a lot of files. So for instance, let me go back to that other file I used as example, so I can just go straight to say vim etc, because I go straight to the root. That's why the / comes first. SSH, I know the file is in SSH, and I know the file name is sshd underscore config, and I hit enter. So what happens here is, if I were to display file number, I'll just do my column SENU. So now I might be looking for a file that has been identified to be in line 64 or 54. So this is how I tend to see the line number while I make corrections to what I have to do. So pretty much I think I've touched the important and required commands to be able to work with Vim. Vim, like I mentioned earlier, is a editor for Linux, and this helps you manipulate configuration files, make changes to a file, and clean up as much as you want. So thank you. I'm moving up to the next topic. All right, another very important thing you should learn in Linux is list command. We've used list command a lot. It's just to list a directory. However, there are options that come with list command that are very useful. So one of them is ls-l. So the -l is to add a particular option. So this helps you list. The L is long, so the long listing helps you identify the files that are in the directory easily, the date the file was created, the user who owns the file. So the user is Ubuntu. That's why you can see Ubuntu, the group that the file belongs to. We'll see users and group pretty soon. So this is the permission that is around the file. These are things that we'll look at, but what you need to understand now is to say that you can tell when a file was created, you can tell how long, the size of the file. This file too is empty. This one has about 653 bytes. Pretty much some clarity around how the files, some details about the files rather. So ls-l gives you full details. So if I go to my root directory and I type ls, I can see a lot of files. Now this is to tell you that these files were created April 22nd, February 23rd. These files were created by root. You can see that I didn't create this file because my username is Ubuntu. So these files came with the operating system, or the operating system was the one that installed it from the beginning. So let's just leave it at that. The files that are a link, so links in Linux are shortcuts, so we'll be looking at that as well. So how the ones that are directories will start with D. The ones that are just files that are not a directory and not a link, we just have this dash at the beginning. So the first item here speaks to whether the file is a directory, is a link, or what have you. The rest is talking about the read, write, execute at the user level, read, write, execute at the group level, read, write, execute at other user level. I will explain this further when we get to file permission, but what you just need to understand is that you can view, you can list the files in the directory and in a detailed way. So we have ls-a. -a shows you the files that are hidden. In some cases they are hidden files, and once you type ls you don't see hidden files, but with ls-a you see the hidden files and everything around the directory. So hidden files always start with a dot. That is where you're seeing these have meaning. but this is in this class we are not going into details of that. However, you can see that it doesn't display in the list form, it displays in this form, so you can combine them by saying ls-la. So meaning I want to see everything, both the hidden files and the directory, and in a detailed format. So we have other options, so the ones I use the most is this lsla. I can do lsl, I can do lss, sorry, ls, so you can sort the list in, let's say you want to list the files in alphabetical order, or you want to list them in reverse order, or you want to list them by the time the files were created or modified. So there are so many options which I'll be sharing in another document. So I do lt is to list them in the order they were created, with the most recent one at the top. So let's go back to our directory. So I'm going straight into the Linux, into the Linux practices. Sorry. So let me clear. I just want to go back to our Linux practice and do that's ls. So this gives us a full Linux path and shows everything I need to see. And if I use the T just helps me show lt, shows them in the order at which they were created, with the most recent one at the top. So there are so many options. We have F, we have G. So G lists all files and directory with group name. You can print the index number of each files with the I. So let's say LSLI. The index number, that's the unique identification number of the file. So I've not had any reason to want to do that, but these are so many use cases that you can use to display. So like I told you, I do ls a lot. When I want to see details, I do lsl. When I want to see everything including hidden files, I do lsla like this, and I see every single item in that direction. So that's that about ls. So creating shortcuts and all that, we'll leave that for the advanced class, but in the meantime, let's say that is what we want to learn. So another thing we want to look at is filter. So let's go back to our table of contents. I'll share this document at the end of the class. I'll share the link to this document is displayed on the screen rather, and you can always pick it up from there. So the next thing we're looking at is filter and input output redirection commands. So without wasting time, let's quickly jump at that. So now we have command called grep. So grep is a command used for finding text from any text input. So we have a file in this directory etc passwd. Now what we do with this file is to see all the user that is tied to this Linux server. So these are the different users in this Linux server. The one we're currently using is the Ubuntu. These other users were created by the system or by any form of installation or software package that was set up on this Linux server. So some packages that you download would create a user, but these are system users, so it's not a user that you created yourself that you can log in with. But this is a root, which is the Oga Pata Pata of them all. For those who understand what that means, is the super administrator user. Then the Ubuntu is the one that we are logged in with. So now the use of grep is, there will be a lot of configuration file, a lot of very huge documents that a very huge file that you might not have to log in with. But in a situation whereby I want to know if there's a root, if there's a text root in this file, all I just need to do is to do grep root So I'm looking for grep in this file. That's what it just means, etc pass wd. So if there's grep there, it tells me where the line it is. It just displays the line where that grep file is. So now grep is case sensitive. I cannot be looking for capital root and expect it to return the result, because what I'm looking for is in lowercase. Now, but if I am, obviously when you're searching for files, you need to be sure that whether you're even typing the right case. So irrespective of the whether it's in capital letter or small letter, so I can actually search for it with the -I, which is the option that says you can search for this file with that directory. You can search for this text in this file, whether it's case sensitive, whether it's in capital letter or not. So that is how we use grep. Grep is a very handy tool. There's many situations where you have to look for files in that light. So now another very way to use filter commands is to be able to say I want to see less etc pass. What this does is, because this file is very huge, what it does, it will show you this file in different pages, more or less, so you can see the file. If I hit enter again, it shows me the next till it gets to the end of the file, right? So it displays content page wise or line. So if I intend to go to the next page, I press D, so I've gotten to the end of that file. If I want to go back by page, I press B, and let me quit again. So less is to display a very long file, to display the content of a very long file, and for you to be able to see them page by page. So we have less, then you type the name of the file, and we also have more. More is exactly same like less, however the commands that you use to go through it is slightly different. So I do this, and if I want to search between this place, we use the same command that we use in so if I'm searching for the word no, I can say a lot of no login, but let's say I'm searching for the word no login, and I hit enter, it should highlight all the no login. If I type D, it should take me to the next page of the document. If I type B, it should take me back to the first page of the document. So this is just you moving around a very huge file document in Linux. So sorry, now in this vein, I would also introduce you to a command called head of, when I type head, so before I move to head, if I do cat that same file, what happens is cat just goes through the file. Now the file it has echoed is very long, and I might not be able to scroll up and scroll down in most terminals. So it means that if what I'm looking for is in the beginning, I can obviously have missed it. So that is where less comes in. So it shows you, it displays the content of a file in pages. Now if I type the same file, I do head etc pass, oh sorry, it's etc not ect, and I do head, this shows me the first 10, let me clear my screen, this shows me the first 10 lines of the document. So now maybe what I'm looking for, I want to see the beginning of a configuration file. Let me see how the configuration started, or I could do tail etc the same file, and I see the last 10 lines of that document. So this is what you do with head and tail. Okay, so that's it. Let's clear the screen again. And now there's another command we want to see. It's called sed. Sed is stream editor. We use it a lot when you want to search for a particular file, a particular text, and replace with another text. So let's go back to please do not do find and replace on the file that we used in the example for our tail and head. Those are system files, so if you manipulate, if you edit anything there, you can cause issue with your Linux server. Here we want to work with our first file, so I just do cat. Cat is for me to see the content of the file. So let's assume that I misspelled Linux in all the documents, and instead of Linux, well, maybe where I type Linux, I meant to type Unix. So now set is a command that you use to go into the file. So look at what I've done. So I'll do I'll do set, then the single quote, then S with a forward slash. So this is how I specify the word I'm looking for. In this case is Linux, right? And I'll say the word I want to replace is Unix, right? So I would also end it with a forward slash and G and leave it in that quote. So this is how you do search and replace, find and replace. Then I'll type the file name. In this case it is first file. If I hit enter, now the content of the file displays, but everywhere you have Linux has been replaced with Unix. However, if I go back to search to preview the content of the file, which is cat first file, it doesn't replace it. You see, everything inside here is still displaying Linux. I hope that's clear. So let me go back. I do find and replace. I have Linux, change to Unix. However, when I try to display the file again, I still see Linux. Why? Because the find and replace does not actually replace the content of the file. What it just does is it replaces and displays it and cuts it out to you. However, if you want to do a find and replace of that same file and you want to output it, this is where input output redirect comes in. So what you want to do here is to say that set command, search for Linux, replace with Unix. Let me clear my screen so that this shows properly. So on your keyboard, if you press the up keyword or down key on your down arrow key and up arrow key, what it does is it shows you, it takes you to the last command you have typed in. The more you go up, the more it goes to the previous command you've typed. So when you come down, it shows you the ones you typed more after. So I'm coming back here, then I put my greater than sign, which is like an arrow facing forward, and I say second file dot txt. What this does is it does the find and replace, but it saves the output, save the changes to a file called second file dot txt. So now if I type ls, I'll have two files. One is the first file dot txt, the second one is the second file dot txt. So if I do cat the first file, then you see this. Then if I do second file, which is the name of the second file, now I'm seeing Unix. So now I have done a find and replace. However, I save the changes to a different file. So that is what we do with the forward arrow. So now I can so I type ls, I see the list of files inside my directory. If I type ls and I put this forward arrow and I say results.txt, what I've done is instead of that command to display on my screen, it sends the output of the command to a file called result.txt. So now I have done ls. However, if I do cat result, I'll see the result of my ls in that file. So this is what we refer to as redirecting your output or input to a file. So now I have a file called result.txt. So I've done ls, right? But I redirected it to result.txt. If I do lsla, which is a different output, and I do result.txt and I hit enter, by the time I cut result, you can see that the output, the entire output is different. Now, another thing you notice is what was in result before has been replaced by the new output. So that is where that's where we'll be introducing the double arrow. Now the double arrow is to say go and append the result to this server. So if I were to, in the beginning we did cat etc. This is how you check your operating system, which operating system you're using. However, I want to append the output to that result.txt file. So by the time I go back to cat that result now, as against having only the output I just displayed, you see the previous content, which is the LA, and the new output is now here. So sometimes you see a lot of people say echo null to results. It's like me trying to display null in the result. So this output will just clear whatever is there and display the value null. Echo is a common command in Linux, Python, PHP, and other programming languages that just displays the output of what you said it should echo. So echo null, we just display null. So if I had said echo null without redirecting the output anyway, I just say null. If I say echo my name, it just echoes my name. But in a more advanced Linux class, you might be seeing how to create bash script, variables, and all that. But with your good understanding of Linux, this can help you, move up to other great stuff in Linux. So that's about pushing redirect. There are other options, like when you want to display only errors, but I don't want us to, drag too many things that would confuse you. I want you to know the important, most used Linux command for beginners, so that way you are comfortable and you can dive straight into Linux on your own. So there are other things around Linux that you need to know, like piping. So piping is when you want to, it's like merging two commands together. You want to cut something, however you want to grep the output, So let me give you another example. So if I say cat etc pass wd, this displays all the content in this file, right? However, I don't want to, it's not everything I want to display, right? So I want to display just anything that has the word login. So I'll do, so this is like a filter. The piping sign, is like saying, oh, we want to use something to display. So while you are displaying everything here, I just want to see only login. So now cannot possibly work without. Okay, so I'll come to explain what sudo does, but let's see if this will give me a different result. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I'm supposed to use the word grep. I forgot. So now pipe is like do this and this. That's what that's this we call it piping in Linux. This is the straight line just above your /. So if you hold shift /, you will have this straight line. So you say, okay, I want to display everything in my etc password file, but just grep only login. Remember, grep filters through a document, so everything that has the word login is what is returned. So if I were to look for the word www, it returns only the lines in that file that has the word www. So this is also very important for you to note, and that's another thing to learn while you're using Linux. So if I do ls, I might want to just grep only file that have I might only want to grep file that have txt. Let's see. So I do ls, then I put grep star dot, oh sorry, I do grep.txt. I only want to see file that ends with or that has the word .txt. So it doesn't just list everything in the directory, it only lists .txt files for me. So they come in very, very handy, and this is how you use them. Also, we have another command called find. I might be looking for a file within a directory. So maybe I'm looking for a file called first file, and within this directory I'll just say find, because why you need to use this command is you'll probably be searching for a lot of files. You might be searching for a file among a lot of files. So in my end I can do etc. So I want to go into the etc directory. So I said find inside etc directory. I'm looking for a file by the name ssh. Okay, so I don't have the permission to go into that folder, right? And that is why it's telling me that I don't have such access. So let me put sudo. This is me introducing sudo. We'll see more on sudo soon. Sudo is like saying that because those files, you need the super admin privilege, you need the root privilege. So, and since I'm not the one that created the files, and I'm not logged in as a super admin, so I have to use the sudo command before I initiate any command that requires an admin privilege. And the only reason I can do that is because the user account that was created for me also has that sudo privilege. Not all users will be able to use the sudo command. So I hope you get what that means. But for now, until we get to users and permission, this is pretty much a simple way of saying you're looking for a file within a particular directory, and you're looking for files with the name ssh. You can look for files using different options. It could be by name, it could be by type, it could be by the user who created the file, right? And these are where all this option would also come in. So if I was looking for a file by type, what type of file am I looking for, right? So, and let me look for a typical example. Let me say I'm looking for a file by user. I know that roots created most of the file there, and I type roots, so it returns all the files that were created by root in that directory. But if I was looking for a file with the user Ubuntu, there's no file in that directory that was created by Ubuntu. So now another thing we need to understand, if I type lsl, you see we can see that all the files here were created by Ubuntu. Now if I created a file, now we create file with touch. This is an empty file, by the way. File name and file new. If I type lsl, I'll see the file new, and it was created by Ubuntu user. If I do sudo touch file new 2, so I'm creating a new file, but I'm using the sudo privilege to create a file. By the time I hit enter, now you can see that the file new 2 is seen to have been created by the root user, because that sudo means that, okay, I'm using the root privilege to create the user. So in this case, we have files that were created by root, we have files that were created by Ubuntu user. So if I were to search for file the way I just did in my previous example, and I'll use the current directory as the directory that we want to search for files that were created by root. You can see it shows that these files there's one file created by root. If I wanted to know the files that were created by Ubuntu, I'll search, I'll find files created by Ubuntu, and I'll see the files that were created by Ubuntu. So this file was created by root, but these files were created by Ubuntu. So this is you searching for file. You might be looking for a file anywhere in the system. It could just be anywhere. Maybe I'm looking for a file inside the etc. So I'll just say find by name, because that is the only logical thing you want to do. After specifying the directory, you now say the name. I'm looking for a file with the name SSH. Anywhere it has a file called SSH, it will return it to me. But because I don't have permission to search for anything in that directory, I have to add the sudo. So now it returns all the files with the name SSH. It might be SSHD that I'm looking for, because there's a file called SSHD. So it tells me the exact location of that file. So the file is inside etc pam.d sshd. So I hope this gives you good standing with searching for files and understanding how files work in Linux. So we'll be moving to the next item, which is we creating users and understanding users and groups. Alright, so the next thing we'll be looking at is users and groups. Right, so if you are using a Linux example or repository, a Linux server that is not AWS, you get away with everything in this practice. But if your Linux server is an AWS service, there's a permission you might need to change, which you can always look that up on the internet to see how to allow password authentication, because by default AWS does not allow password authentication. So first, let me clear my screen so we can get right at it. So the first thing you need to understand about users, there are different users there in Linux. So we have the root user, which is the user that we've seen. We have the regular user, which is the one that was created for us and shared with us. So Ubuntu, Imram, a name of a person, Lou, Vagrant, those are different username. Nola, Tom, John Doe. You are creating users for people on the Linux server. So we have root, we have the regular user. Then we have services. There are users that were created by services in the system. So these three are the important user types you can have on a Linux service. So if I want to know the user I'm currently logged in with, if I type ID, it shows that the name of the user I'm logged in with is Ubuntu. This is my user ID 1000. The group ID is 1000. The group name is Ubuntu. The group is 1000 is Ubuntu. These are other groups that this user belongs to, and with this group I have access to be able to do admin, sudo, and some other things. Now if I were to look for all the users within the system, I want to know where they are. It is that same file, so I'll just do cat etc passwd. These are all the users in the system, right? But these are system users. These are, aside from the super user, which is root, the system user and every other thing you see based on installation packages, and the only normal user here is Ubuntu. Now if I want to know how many group I have in the system, I'll go through the same step. Instead of passwd, I'll type group. So group shows me all the group in the system. So there are different groups. There's a group for root, there's a group for this, and we also have a group called Ubuntu. So group and users, the understanding is to say that a user is the person who logs into the system, and when you create a user, it has its own group. So if I create a user called Lou, it will come with a group called Lou. All the files I create, everything I do is within my Lou user. However, if I want somebody to be able to have access or some level of privilege on my files, I can add them to my Lou group, meaning that there are permissions tied to that group, that if we share the same group, we might be able to work or have certain privileges on the same files. But first thing first, I need us to create a user. And to create a user, you need to use the command sudo add user. So on Linux, in some distribution is add user, in some is user add. So once I say sudo add user and I want to create a user for the name Nola, so I add a user with the name Nola. He has created the group, he has done everything, and it's asking me to set a password for that group. So I can type a password Nola. It will tell me to retype the password Nola, and every other information that comes with the password, I can do that. That's how you add a user. Now if I want to see that user, I do etc pass it's etc pass wd. So I see all the users. You can see that I have a new user down here. It's Nola, Ubuntu Nola. Alright, so that's we creating a user. Now one of the things you can quickly do is to switch to that user. However, we'll come back to switching to users shortly. So to also create a group, now I want to create a group. Remember that the group that the user you've created has a group that comes with it. So for every user you see the group. It is okay. So let me show you what I mean. If I do ID and I hit enter, it shows me the current user that I am logged in as. When I do ID Nola, which is the other user we created, it gives me details about Nola, telling you that the user ID for Nola is Nola, the group it belongs to is Nola, and this is the type of user. So now if I create a group, so to create a group you say group add. So I want to add a group called DevOps. So group add, okay, sorry, I'll do sudo group add because that action is an admin action, so it's a DevOps. So I've created a user called DevOps, right? Now I can add that user that I just created to that group called DevOps, right? So that way we know that we are making a user Nola be tied to a group called DevOps. So the command to do that is user mode. So it's like modify user, then I'll say I'm adding the group whatever and DevOps, then Nola. So again, you must have the sudo when you're running administrative command, because only a super admin that can do that. In this case, if I do ID Nola again, what you see here is this is the Nola ID. The Nola has a group called Nola, but Nola belongs to two groups, which is Nola and DevOps. So these are the groups Nola belong to. That means if a privilege is tied to DevOps, Nola would also have. If a permission is tied to DevOps group, that means Nola would also have access to that group. So if I were to delete a user, well, we don't need that user anymore, or we don't need that group anymore. So we'll do the command will be sudo user del, that's user delete, then I'll type r, then Nola, just delete everything that has to do with Nola and everything in it. Then I'll do the same thing, which is to delete the group Nola. Okay, so when I deleted that user Nola, the group has been deleted. So now I want to delete the group DevOps. So this group have been deleted. So in this case, if I do ID Nola again, it will tell me there's no user with the access Nola. Now, why do we need this commands, right? It's very important to know that you want to create a user, you need other people to be able to access the server. So in this case, I'll do user add again, user add, and I'll call the user this time. I'll call the user dial. So I'm creating a user dial. Remember, you have to use the sudo dial. Sudo add user, rather add user. Let's say Bola. So that user add works, but it won't give you the liberty to set the password and every other group directory, like all these things that you're seeing. And there are different distribution that uses. So Red Hat Linux, you use user add. For Ubuntu, you use add user. So remember, we're using Ubuntu. So and I want to create a password for that user. So the user we're creating now is Bola. I hope I typed the password correctly. So the password did not change because I didn't type the correct password the second time. So now that I've done that, it will expect me to type a full name and all this information for the user. Now I've created a user called Bola with a specified password. Now if I want to switch to Bola as a user, meaning I want to move from without logging out, I'll do I can switch from one user to another. So SU then the user ID in this case is Bola. So ask me for the Bola password, and I'm no longer in Ubuntu. I'm in the Bola account. Now in Bola account, if I type ls, obviously there's nothing has been created here, so I don't have any directory. If I do cd slash this way and I come to ls, I can see all this directory. I can do cd home and type ls. I can see that there's a Bola directory and there's an Ubuntu directory. However, if I decide to go into the Ubuntu, it's telling me I don't have permission to do that because I am not an Ubuntu user, right? And I don't have right to do anything there. So this is me exiting the Bola account. I'm back to my Ubuntu user. I can exit here. Normally when I want to log on to my server, I log in with the SSH. For those who know how to run into the terminal using SSH. So usually when you have a server, you log in with the username, and at the IP address, you just ask you for the password to get in. So now I'm logging in directly as the Bola user, as against accessing it as the Ubuntu user. So there are so many other things you can do with user privileges, but at the moment, these are the key things I guess you might want to learn how to do. So let me exit and go back as my Ubuntu user, because the Ubuntu has more privilege than the Bola user. Alright, welcome to the next class. We'll be looking at file permissions, and with file permissions we'll be appreciating why we create users and groups in Linux. So the two of them go hand in hand. For what we've done in the previous session was to talk about creating users, creating group, adding users to a group. But what's the benefit of creating more users in an account? How do you manage the privileges? This is where file permission comes in, and the best way to understand this more is to go back to listing with details. Now I would need to pull this out. So here highlighted, I needed to get this. Let me just take this to a different screen. Yeah, perfect. Now, for every file that you display in using the long list approach, you have this first um, column showing you the type of file and the permissions that are involved. So I have to break this down into four. Now, this is the first character, which is D. The next three and the next three are what you need to understand clearly. Now, the first character is either a D, in most cases, a hyphen or L. Now, D tells you this is a directory, right? The dash, which is the hyphen, tells you it's a file, so it doesn't have any description. Then the L is a link. There are other objects, but these are the three major ones. If you get this right, then you're good to go. Now, if you look carefully, this is a directory. That's why the first one is showing a D. This is a file, right? And that's why you have the hyphen. It means that there's no description. So if you don't have a description, these are files, and this last one is a D. Now I'll move straight to a directory that will have more descriptions. So LSL. Now this gives you, this is a link, that is the L. That means there's a directory, but it's like a shortcut on your desktop where you're seeing a folder on your desktop. However, the folder is actually not there. When you click on it, it takes you to the exact directory or the exact folder. Now, the D is a directory. That's what this just tells you. So this is a directory, but the one that doesn't have anything. So if I put a file here, for instance, let's say I just create a file here called Sudo touch bola as a file, and I do the LSL now, you see that that file would have hyphen, meaning that the first item has no description. So in that case, it's a file. Now you see that the next three, this one has an hyphen, this one has an R hyphen hyphen, R hyphen hyphen. Those are what I want to describe here. So I only just created this space so that you understand better. So the first one is either a directory, a file, or a link. Then the next one, the next three are together. They describe the permission for the user. The user is the person who created the file, whether it's Ubuntu, whether it's Bola, whether it's the root. So now, what permission does the owner of the file have? The user who created the file is what this first three is describing. So the owner of the file has a read, it has a write, and it has a execute permission. That is how you know the privilege that is tied to these files. So being the root user, the root, who is the user, is telling you that the root has the read, write, execute permission. Now the root is in a group called root. Now this group has the read, it does not have the write, but it has the execute. It means that they can read the file. If you're in the group root, if you've been added to the group called root, that means you can read the file, you can write, that means you can modify the file, and you can execute the file. So if there's any executable file there and you want to run it, you can run it. Now the last three refers to any other user in the system. So any other user refers to Ubuntu, refers to Bola, because we are not in the root, we are not the root user, and we are not in the root group. So it means that we cannot write the file, we can only read and execute. So I hope that's clear. Now let me go back to my CD Linux. Keep doing CD Linux like this. Now LSL here. So these are all the files. Here we have different files, and the Ubuntu user who created this directory can read, write, execute, can read, write, execute. The group Ubuntu can read, write, execute, but every other person who might for any reason have access to this file can only read but cannot execute, right? So let me play another example. Sorry, let me explain further. So the owner of the files, this describes the permission that is tied to the owner of the file, that's the user of the file. Then the group that the user belongs to, the group that file belongs to, this is the permission that is tied to them. Then any other user can do this, can either read and execute. So now we'll be playing with the Ubuntu and the root user. As an Ubuntu user, I create a file, touch data.txt. If I do lsl, what this means is data.txt, I can read and write. I'm the owner of the file. Members of the Ubuntu group can read and write this file. But every other person who is not an Ubuntu user can only read that file, but cannot write into the file. Now, if I were to create an environment where I have to tamper with file 2, now I'm logged in as Ubuntu. Only the root can read and write. Every other person can write. If I do vim file new 2, right, at the bottom of the file it already states clearly read only. So it means that if I try to type one in changing the read only file, at the time I'm done and I try to save and quit, it will keep telling me that this is a read only file. I cannot write on this file, so I can only quit without saving, because I am not the creator of that file. It's the root user that created that file. And when I created the file, I created it with sudo, meaning that I used the root permission. So it means that if I have to edit it, I have to use the sudo. Now, as the root user of this file, I can change the permission of the file. I can allow other people to write on the file. And that is where the commands we want to learn next comes in. So it's called chmod, change mode, change the mode of a particular file. So I can say you, which is the user, I should add x. X is I want to add execution rights to this file, which is file name. I created the file, so I should be able to do that. File name is read, write, execute. So I can do that. So before you run chmod, you need to use sudo, and I can do that to file new. Now if I do lsl again, now you see that the file new now has the color has even changed, because when a file is executable, it gives it that green color. You can see that X has been added to the user, to the privileges that the user have. So it means someone can execute this file. But we could not edit file 2. Now if I want to make file 2 editable by anybody, right, then we need to add that right to the others, which is the third one. So if I were to add it, I'll do sudo chmod others is O plus W. So I'm adding the rights privilege to other users. For which file? I'll now say file new 2. Now if I do lsl again, you can see that the file new 2 now has the W, meaning that others can write to the file. Now if I go back and do that vim file new 2, as soon as I make my changes, I'll be able to save and quit, meaning that I'm not restricted any longer on that file. You understand? So this is the kind of thing that you need to understand clearly when using Linux. However, this is me tying the privilege to the exact category of user. So if I had done sudo chmod plus X without plus W without specifying whether it is U. So is either U plus X, meaning that I'm tying this. Sorry. Let's use W. Let's use W. So I'm doing chmod plus W. So on the file new 2. Now what this means is that both the user, the group, and others would have that right permission. So if I do LSL now, you can see that the W is across the. Okay, so I think I chose the wrong file name. Chmod file. Okay, plus let's do plus X. Then if I do LS, LSL. Now you see both the read has X, both the user has X, the group has X, and the other has X. So this is how you you give permission across the different category of users that is tied to a file permission. I believe that's clear, and my example would make it more easier for you to use. So that way, people who share the same group with a file can actually how do I explain this? Can actually share the same permission with a particular file because we belong to the same group and the group has been given the permission. So how do you create a group? I remember we see group add, group sorry, group group add. I want to create a group. Let's say I want to create a group for my developers in my organization. Sorry, I need to add Sudo. So I have a group called developers, that's what it means, and I can tie users to that group. So I can say user mode dash. So I would say I'm tying developers, I'm tying Ubuntu to that group. I keep forgetting to use the sudo command. The sudo command just helps give the admin privilege to do certain things. So if I do id Ubuntu, so I know that Ubuntu belongs to not just the Ubuntu group but also the developer group. Now for a file that has been created, I want to change the owner of the file, because sometimes this file is a root file but I want to change the owner to the developer, or I want to change, you can change the file, the owner of the file, the group owner of the file, and so many other examples to a particular file. So in this case I can say, well, I want to change the group, change group of so we want to change the group of this directory vpdir. Remember, we have to use sudo. Do I have invalid group? Okay, so the group name is developers. Sorry. So the right name is developers. So if I do id, no, for instance, if I do lsl, now you see that the directory group name has changed to developers, and this file says that anybody that has that is tied to the developer group can modify this directory and the content of the directory, including execute right on the directories. So pretty much these are the things you need to play around. you know I can change the owner of a file. So for instance, let me see, cat etc pass wd. We have a user called Bola. Now from this directory, if I go to the root directory, and while I'm here, if I try to create a folder here, say I call it John, it will not create because I don't have permission to do that. So if I do kdir and I say John, now I have a folder called John here. Now the John directory is owned by the root user, meaning that if I change into the John directory and I decide to do touch file 1, I get permission denied because I'm an Ubuntu user. I don't have the right to create any thing inside the John directory. Even if I change to my Bola user, which is another user, and I go to that directory and I see a directory called John, and I try to cd into John and I try to create touch file, I get the same error because they don't have this privilege to do that. Now, but from the root user, right? So talking about users, you can also sudo. So now this is me using the admin privilege to change the ownership of that file, meaning that, okay, while the file was created with the root user, I want to change the owner from whoever owns it now. So I want to change the owner of that John directory to Bola. So if I do lsl, what you see now is this file has changed from root, which was the former owner, to Bola. Now that is me changing it. I can change both the user and the group, which is usually ideal. So I can say, oh, the user and the group will be developers, meaning that if I come back to the file, I'm saying that the owner of this file has been changed from root to Bola, and the group this directory belongs to is developers, meaning that Bola can do read, write, execute. Every other person cannot write, they can only read and execute. So if I go back to my Bola user, remember how to switch from one user to another, su-bola. So now, while I'm logged in as Bola, if I go back to that John directory, so I'm just going straight into the John directory. So I'm inside the John folder. If I do touch file 1, now Bola has been able to create a file because Bola has the ownership of that directory. She can do anything in that directory. So these are things that you must understand when it comes to changing directory, changing permission, and managing file permissions in Linux. So Linux has two types of file permission when you want to manage file permission, which one of them is what you've seen, and let me see, some people are more comfortable with the symbolic approach, which is what I've just shown you, where you do chmod plus x on a file, and you can do so let me go straight into the Linux directory, cd So I'm in the Linux directory. I do lsl. So I have these different files and their permissions, right? And if I want to add on this second file, if I want to add a write, no, it doesn't have an execute. I'll do plus x second, meaning that I've added execute write to. You can see that this second file now has x in the user, in the group, in the other permission, meaning that I have changed the permission of this file using the symbolic style. So this symbolic is either you're adding a read permission, or you're adding a write permission, or you're adding an execute permission. That's where the RWX comes in. Now we have another way, and this other way is using numeric version of changing permission. The numeric version is 4 equals read, 2 equals write, and 1 equals execute. Now this file, looking at this symbol above, what it means is that I'm opportune to use 3 numbers. In most cases, when we create a file, by default the file is 640. I'm just saying 640. It means that if you look at 4 plus 2 is 6, so 6 is read and write. 4 is read only. 0 means there's no other permission. But if I choose to put 1, what I've done is I've said that the owner should have read and write, the group should have only read, and others should have execute privilege only. So the numbering, if I want to give all of them read, write, execute, that's where you see 777, because read, write, execute means that the entire user group and others should have read, write, execute. So rather than use the plus x plus u plus, you can also do sudo. So now for the data file, which is the first file, I can do chmod. If I do 000 on that file and I say data file should have 000 permission, by the time I do lsl, can you see that the file just has all hyphen, nothing, meaning that nobody can read the file, nobody can write to the file, nobody can execute the file. Before you can do anything with that file, somebody has to change the file. So in this case, let's say I want to give everybody read, write, and only the owner should have read and write. So now in looking at this formation, read and write is 4 plus 2, which is 6. So the owner should have read, write, read and write. Then every other person should have read, which means every other person will have 4. The group will have 4. So in that situation, I'll do sudo chmod 644 and attach the name of the file. If I come back and do lsl, what I'll see is the owner of the file has read and write, the group has only read, and the other guys only have write. So if I wanted to make it read, write, execute for the owner of the file, then do read and write for the group of the file, then only read for the last option. It means that the command will be, since read, write, execute is 421, which is 7, read and write will be 6, and only read will be 4 for data file, and I hit enter, lsl. So this is just to tell you that the owner of the file has read, write, execute, group members have read and write, and every other person has just the read permission. So some people are comfortable with the symbolic way of changing permissions for files and directories. Some people are more comfortable with the numbering file. So you can choose your style and decide which one you would always use. For some people, they just cram all the styles that are required and ensure that they know how to manage their files. So that's about file permission. I hope you'll be able to pick from there and learn more. So I'll take all this out. So we're moving straight into Sudo, which is what we understand as the last part of our privilege course. Now you notice that we have two users. How do you check again? You type cat etc pass wd. While you are seeing a lot of other users, these are system users, but the ones that you used to know that are normal users are the ones that come at the bottom. They will always have a home directory, and the user type starts from 1001 because Ubuntu, which is a normal user tool, it was created by the application. It was created by this AWS, because that's where I got this cloud Linux server from. And by default, when you use an Ubuntu, it comes with a normal user called Ubuntu. So the remaining two are the ones I created, but they are all similar and they run on the same system. Now, what is Sudo? Sudo gives power to a normal user to execute command which is owned by root user. That is why when we want to do certain things, like even the permission, the privileges we are changing, you can't just say chmod, like that command I just did now. The chmod, if I don't add sudo, it will tell me I don't have permission to do that, right? Okay, I could do this because that particular file I've already created the right permission on it. But for a file like file new 2, it will definitely fail because I don't have the root privilege to tamper with that file. So changing permission for file to true operation is not permitted. So but now there are some times you need to switch from the user you are to the super admin user. That super admin gives you unlimited privileges. So now remember when we wanted to change to the other user we created, which is Bola. Sorry, there has to be a space here, which is Bola. So this is me switching to Bola. I've moved from Ubuntu to Bola. I'm going back to Ubuntu. But when I do sudo -i, sudo -i, and I run, I switch to the root user. You can see that the color has changed. The username is showing root. This is the super admin. Anything I do here, I don't need to type sudo again. I don't need permission to do that. I don't need to I don't need permission. I can go into any file. I can go into Bola directory. I can go to Ubuntu directory. I can create files anywhere. This is me, the Superman of the Linux server. Now, if I type ID here, it shows that this is the root user. If I go back by exiting, I go back and I do ID here. You can see it's telling me this is the Ubuntu user and it's showing me all the privileges and the group that I belong to. So back to sudo I. Now with this, I'm able to do so many things without stressing or creating barriers for myself. There are ways that you need to learn. There are some things I'm not covering in this course because I want this to be beginner friendly. And as much as I've taught a lot of things, as a beginner or intermediate Linux user, you must know these things. So I will just stick to you being able to switch to the super user. So there might be reason for you to run certain commands and you want to have freehand all across that access, then you have to switch to the root user. Now the Bola user, which is a regular user, su Bola, once I log in with Bola, I type Bola password to get into Bola's home directory. So while I'm in Bola's home directory, from Bola's home directory, you cannot switch to the admin user, even if I know the password. It will tell you that Bola is not in the sudoers file. So what do we mean by being in the sudoers file? For Bola to be able to do super admin actions, Bola needs to be moved into a sudoer file. I'm not covering that in this class, and that's because you can learn that on your own. But the most important things you need to know are what I've shown you. Being able to if you are able to do everything, I'm sure doing a research on how to add Bola to a sudoer class would be a lot easier. So let's just move on. All right, so that's it about Sudo. There's a lot to learn in every aspect that I've shown you guys, but with this you're good to go. So the last thing we'll be talking about is software management. Software management is pretty straightforward. Depending on the Linux distribution that you're using, that will determine the command that you'll be typing. So the first thing you need to understand is that there are different distribution for Linux. So the popular ones, like I mentioned, is things like the one we're using, Ubuntu. So we have CentOS, we have what have you. Now we'll just take a comparison of Ubuntu and CentOS. So in Ubuntu, when you have to install a software, so that's where we are. So or you want to install a package, you do sudo apt get, then the name of the package. So in CentOS, it's sudo yum, right? Sudo yum, then you run the package. But there are some things you need to first understand. Once you purchase a server and you're logging in for the first time, there are a few things you need to do. So you do sudo apt get update. In CentOS, just like I said, where we have apt or apt get in CentOS, it will be sudo yum update. So if I hit enter, so what this does is it tries to pull down all the updates for the packages that I have, the packages that it just runs the general update. The way your Windows does update, your phone does update, any other software does updates. So if there are any updates that you need to upgrade, it would show you, and you can now do the sudo apt-get upgrade, then the name of the file. You could just want to upgrade everything. So, and these are just things that you should also put in mind. So when you want to install a package, you want to understand how you want to use apt, you can do apt help. So this just gives you how to use apt. You are either updating package, or you are upgrading a particular package, or you want to show a package details, or you want to show list of packages based on the package name. You're searching for a package. So these packages are like saying software that have been installed on your server. So these are pretty straightforward. So we've seen updates. If I want to know if a particular package, so there's a package I use a lot. I'm a PHP programmer, so that I have a PHP programming background. So most time when I purchase a Linux server, I have to install Apache. So sometimes I might want to just search, does this system have Apache? So I could just say search Apache. It's called Apache 2. So it checks and sees that, oh, there's so many Apache packages that I can install. But because I don't have Apache installed, I can now decide to install it. So you have sudo apt install Apache. So this is how you install softwares packages on Ubuntu. Sudo apt install Apache 2. If it's CentOS, CentOS doesn't have Apache 2. It's called HTTPD there. And to install it, you do sudo apt sudo yum install. So where you have apt here, you replace with yum. So once I hit enter on my screen, and the next thing is it tries to install Apache 2 on my server. So this is Apache installing. So it asks me, do I want to continue? I type yes, then it installs the Apache as it is. I'm trying to get the IP address of that particular server, because once you have Apache installed, I can. So Apache is a web server. So for me to see if Apache was installed successfully, I can visit the IP address. Apache will have a default Apache page that will show. So this is evidence that Apache was installed successfully. So this is you know, me installing a web service on my Linux server. I'm not saying that you have to use Apache. So for instance, if I don't need Apache on that my server anymore, I do remove. So just the same way you install a package, you want to uninstall it, you do install and remove. You probably ask me, yes, it's asking, am I sure I want to remove this package? So if Apache is no longer on the server, I'm sure by the time I come back to load that same page, if I let me close this browser and try to load it again, let me be sure that's successfully removed. I doubt it would definitely, you see, say this site can't be reached, because Apache is a service that allows you to run web application on your Linux server. So Apache is no more there. Pretty much these are something. So there are a lot of things you can install, uninstall, reinstall. These are commands that you get comfortable with as you move on. So like I had explained to you earlier, one of the things you also need to know is how to log into a Linux server. Usually what happens is you probably would have purchased the Linux server somewhere. You'll be given your username and password with an IP address, because every server will have its own IP address. All you need to do is to SSH into the server. So you need to log in with, if you are using a Windows, you can use your Windows terminal, or you install Git Bash. If you are using a Mac, I use a Mac, you use the terminal in Mac. All you need to do is to type SSH. SSH is a shell, is how you connect to your server, is a gateway to your server. So you use the username. So in this case, I could use either Ubuntu, because the username given to me when I got this server was Ubuntu. But you know that when we logged into the Ubuntu server, I had created another user called Bola, so I could actually log in with Bola at the IP address of your server. This is how you log into your Linux server remotely. So if I press enter, it tries to connect to the server. If it finds that username, it will ask me for the password. So I enter the password to the user that I had created at the time I set up that user. So this is me logging in to my server. So I'm logging out by typing exit. I want to log in with the other user, which is Ubuntu. Why I'm logging in with Ubuntu is because I know I have the privilege to do a lot of things with the Ubuntu server. So this is how you manage your server. You can also copy files from your local system to your server. It's called SCP command. I'm sure when you get comfortable with every other thing I've taught you, with a little research, you'll be able to see through that. So there are some also important things that you must have at the back of your mind. While you are in your server, you should be able to check your disk space. You should be able to know what's your memory like, what's the system memory. So I can say, if I do df is how you check your disk space, but this does not give you the disk space in a human readable form. So you have to add df-h. So the h there is human, so it gives you a human readable form. So this current server has a 6 gig disk space. Well, it's about 8 gig if you combine all the temporary and the partitions that he has created. But the major parts where you see the available space on the partition that you are is 6.8 gig. I've used 2.1 gig, and I have 4.7 disk space available. This you can use to check the performance of your disk space from time to time as you're using your Linux server. So this is also a very handy tool, a very handy command. Another one that makes a lot of sense is while we're in our directory, if I want to know du-sh is the command to check what size is the Linux directory using. This Linux directory that we've been creating and creating files inside. So it's telling us that the Linux directory is using 44 KB, So this is to check the size of a particular directory, maybe because you want to be sure of what you have in it before you move it or you copy it and all that. So there are so many things you can do with Linux, so many system administrative processes, zipping files, killing processes, system directories, hardware configuration, a lot of statistic stuff that you can do with Linux. But I believe with this, I've given you the confidence to be able to drive more, learn more on Linux. So you might be running a Linux process, you might be running a Linux command that is freezing or slowing down your system. You want to know which processes are running on your system at the moment. You can see these are all the processes running at the same time. But if I am looking out for a particular one, maybe I want to know if there's a Apache server running. Remember this piping where you want to now check by grep. So I can do while I'm checking the process, grep Apache. So if Apache is running, you can see it's telling me that this is telling me that there's nothing running. The only running is this. The only Apache process running is this command that I just ran. Let's say I install Apache and Apache is running. Let me show you. So I want to reinstall Apache. Sudo apt install Apache 2. So I know Apache has been installed and is running in the background. So if I run that command again, now you can see that it's telling me that Apache is running in these different directories with the different users rather. So this is the directory where it's running. Let's assume that I want to kill Apache. Kill means that maybe the process is hanging the server. It could be something else. Now I have to use the word kill with the process ID. These are the process ID. Right, so if I do kill 4779, oh sorry, I need to use sudo kill. Now if I run that command again to see which processes are running, Apache is not running. It has killed that process. Apache is still installed on the server, but it's currently not running as a process anymore. There are other ways to restart the Apache or to make it run again, but this is how to kill a process. These are things that you need to know or need to find on your server. So if I want to know whether telnet runs on this server, I'll do this ps aux is to just check processes that are running. But if I want to specify the one I'm looking out for, this is how I check it. So that's pretty simple. So there are commands like you wanting to know your host name, you want to know your server name. So this is the host name, and if I put -i, if a domain is tied to that server, this is the host name. The host name is the private IP address of this server. So these are things that you need to know. If I want to know what my server date is speaking to do, so this is the current date and time. You can always change your time zone. I'll leave you to look that up. Just go to ChatGPT, go online, how to change my date, time, or my time zone on my Linux server. These are ways you can play around. Other commands is to say who am I. Who am I is to tell you the username that is logged into this server. Maybe it's not displaying properly and you want to be sure which username is currently logged in to the server. So now there are commands you also need to put in mind. Things like last is to tell you the last set of people who logged into this server and the time they logged in, from where, the IP address, and you might want to do last reboot. right? Who rebooted the server, who came in last, who rebooted the server. You might also want to know, have an idea of all the commands that were run in the last, since the last login. So once I type history, these are all the commands that have run since I've been using this server. Remember from the beginning of the class, these are all the commands from sudo etc. Why do you do this? You also use this to know what people have done on the server, what other users must have done on the server. You log into the user account, you see what commands, what these people have been up to. So these are a bit of some administrative tasks where I can do this. Bola, switch to Bola, because I have access to go into Bola, and I do history from the Bola perspective. I can see all the commands that Bola has run since she logged on to this server. So these are important commands you need to have at the back of your mind. And I believe if you follow this class, practice everything I've shared, if you have questions, you can ask me and I'll respond to you on this YouTube page. And I'm sure if you are able to have a grasp of everything I've taught, you're good to go with Linux. You can dive into any of the cloud computing technology, be it DevOps, and you'll not be afraid of initiating or engaging tools that you need to learn in that regard. Thank you very much for following me on this video. I believe I've been able to impact on you on the basics of Linux.